World of Warfare presents Special Operation Units of the 15th Air Force. Shortly after the formation of the 15th Air Force, Commanding Officer Jimmy Doolittle commissioned the 15th Air Force Weather Detachment under the command of Captain Eugene E. Churchill, which reported directly to the meteorological officer on the mission planning team. Backed by 5 P-38 Lightning pilots and 20 mechanics, Churchill's assignment was to bring greater discipline to mission weather reconnaissance, thereby improving the ratio of completed versus aborted missions. Instead of sending 100 bombers on a flight that might be wasted, Churchill recalled, a fast fighter plane is first sent over the target to take a look at the weather and report back. There was nothing wrong with the idea itself, but it took months of experimenting before it really paid off. Churchill faced a number of moving variables in his quest for better weather reconnaissance, many of which would never be tamed during the war. Initially, weather observations ended when the scout turned back before entering enemy airspace, which meant that hundreds of miles of unreported weather conditions still posed the chance to turn back a dedicated bomber stream. The freakish movement of air masses across the Alps, Churchill recalled, frequently resulted in a complete about-face in the weather within an hour or two. Despite these variables, early results were impressive for the 15th's bottom line. A noticeable drop in aborts was seen within the first week of the detachment's creation on November 3rd, and by the close of February 1944, the Weather Detachment boasted an impressive 15 completed missions that would otherwise have been canceled before wheels up or recalled once the mission was underway. When General Nathan F. Twining took command of the 15th from Doolittle, he immediately saw the need to boost the number of weather recon pilots on par with the growing number of bomber groups steadily amassing under his authority. To fill the recon pipeline, the 154th Reconnaissance Squadron was reassigned from North Africa to Bari, Italy, in January of 1944, under the command of Major Joseph Whitwell. Like nearly all aspects of the air war in Europe, scouting techniques evolved through direct experience, historical reflection, and innovative forward thinking. Instead of simply reporting wind speed, wind direction, and visibility, 154th pilots worked in conjunction with their big friend clients, adjusting their practices based on the needs of bomber pilots and bombardiers. In this new recon environment, a scouting flight fronted the bomber stream by 75 miles, reporting on weather up to and now over the target. Whatever weather conditions that were reported by day were then passed on to the RAF prior to the commencement of their night bombing operations. Weather recon pilots flew 3 primary types of missions. The most frequent was the General Area Mission, wherein 154th pilots flew staggered flights over the next day's intended bomb route. Target checks were launched on the day of a planned bombing raid, reporting back on weather conditions along the intended flight path as close to wheels up as possible. If weather proved bad enough to abort a bombing raid, information relayed by target checks frequently allowed mission planners to reroute bombers to secondary targets, rather than calling the stream back to base with a full accompaniment of undelivered bombs. A third brand of mission involved immediate weather obstructions, such as thunderheads or thick overcast that stymied a formation's flight path, obliging recon pilots to probe cloud cover for possible routes through the bad weather. Should a passage be found, bombers could then play a game of follow the leader as they made their way through an otherwise impassable weather front. A successful recon pilot was a man who could spin multiple plates at the same time. Not only was he tasked with flying a complex airplane, but he also had to juggle navigation, communication, and observation. The majority of recon pilots or recce pilots, as they were called, flew with a clipboard strapped around one thigh, recording observational data as he flew the bomber's intended route. Using a map grid, he was able to sketch out the location and direction of weather fronts, including observations on cloud ceilings, visibility, precipitation, wind direction, and velocity, as well as temperatures at intended flight path altitudes. Most recon Lightnings reduce their armament payload to 250 caliber machine guns, exchanging firepower for additional radio and camera gear. For instance, in March of 1944, Walter Pittman photographed a proposed route from the Foggia plain to Budapest using a K-24 camera installed by the squadron's engineering shop. Although recce pilots relied on speed and altitude to dodge the enemy, encounters with Axis fighters did occur. Again in March 1944, Robert Zirkle was bounced by an Me-109. Noting that the tracers from the Me were passing below me, he recalled, I raised the nose of my plane to keep above his fire. As the Me approached, I stalled my ship and dropped down until one of my belly tanks hit him. The enemy plane spun out of sight, and I saw a parachute open. Despite such encounters, few of the 28 Lightnings lost by the 154th went down due to enemy fire. Most casualties suffered by the unit were due to other detriments such as weather, mechanical failure, pilot vertigo, and wind over the Alps. The eighth and final fatality for the squadron came shortly before the end of the war, when a rookie pilot on his first mission prematurely retracted his wheels during takeoff. Because of the collaborative nature of the Mediterranean Air Campaign, by September of 1944, 23 Canadian and RAF pilots joined the ranks of the 154th, flying plywood de Havilland Mosquitoes known as the Wooden Wonder. With an airspeed in excess of 400 miles an hour, recon Mosquitoes remain nearly impervious to conventional enemy fighter interdiction. In addition to its twin-engine high performance, the Mossy carried a two-man crew, which further distributed workloads and improved the accuracy of relayed weather reports. By November, as the first German jet made its appearance over Europe, tail-warning radar was installed in most of the recon P-38s, providing an additional layer of defense against high-speed Me-262 surprise attacks from behind. In December, the 154th received its first H-2X Droop Snoot P-38s, which allowed recce pilots to navigate through nearly all kinds of weather. Early radar technology was finicky with poor surface imagery, as recorded in the Squadron Diarist's entry on Christmas Day, 1944. What with a piss-poor breakfast and the prospect of a morning's routine work down on the flight line, we rise on Christmas morning and can yet sense no difference in the day. Down on the airfield, we dispatch our first radar-equipped P-38 on an operational flight. As the delicate radar equipment becomes ineffective shortly after the plane leaves base, pilot William R. McVitie and radar navigator Thomas J. Watson are not able to put the Droop Snoot through its paces. While Allied intelligence officers employed code-breaking eavesdropping techniques to assess Axis troop movements, war production capabilities, and on-hand fuel supplies, the 15th relied on Photo Joes to capture images of vital targets of interest. Images taken by Photo Joes allowed mission planners, pilots, and bombardiers to scrutinize intended mission targets before heavy bombers were sent aloft. Originally serving under the 12th Air Force, the 5th Photographic Reconnaissance Group had operated in Tunisia, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Elliott Roosevelt, the fourth of President Roosevelt's 6 children. The group moved in late 1943 to San Severo, north of Foggia, Maine. However, the 5th was not reassigned to the 15th until October of 1944. 5th Group headquarters quickly moved to Bari in early October, which allowed for tight coordination with the strategic arm of MTAF mission planners and intelligence personnel. An unusually experienced commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Wilbur Stratton, led the 5th Group in Italy, commanding 2 light squadrons and a third, the 32nd Photo Reconnaissance Squadron. Tragic events from earlier in the year, however, altered the makeup of Stratton's organization. On April 20th of 1944, Luftwaffe heavy bombers raided a 90-ship convoy off of Algiers, slamming a torpedo into the side of the SS Paul Hamilton. Sailing with a cargo of munitions and men, the ship's fiery demise took the lives of 580 men, along with most elements attached to the 32nd Squadron. The sinking, along with the loss of a destroyer and a transport ship, constituted the last real victory the Luftwaffe inflicted on Allied shipping. Rebuilding from the ground up after losing most of her pilots, the 32nd would not be fully operational until mid-November of 1944. Some of the 32nd's replacement pilots had been harvested from fighter groups, and a good many were initially unhappy with the reassignment. Most, however, were quick to understand the importance of their work. "I'd never seen a photo lab," recalls one reluctant newcomer, "but there was an Army Brigadier General and a British Air Vice Marshal looking at the wet negatives, then laying on missions from a field telephone. Wow!" Photo Joes generally flew at altitudes greater than 25,000 feet, which made for frigid conditions inside the cockpit of their P-38s. "Whenever we were going on a mission, we wore many layers of clothing," recalled photo recce pilot Thomas K. Folas, "not only to keep warm at 30,000 feet, but also for survival in case we were forced down in the snowy Alps. The long wool underwear that I had been forced to buy earlier was now very welcome. On top of all the clothes I had put on, a baby blue electric flying suit was added. This suit had small electric wires similar to those in electric blankets, and was helpful in the cold weather, even though it did tend to burn elbows and the rear end, while other parts of the body were still cold. This suit made me look like an oversized 4-year-old ready for bed on a frigid night. 2 pairs of gloves helped keep hands from freezing. All these layers of clothes did create a problem when it came time to relieve oneself after several hours in the air. The relief tube in the cockpit had the annoying habit of freezing up at high altitude and spilling the contents over the pilot's hands. For consistency of target analysis, air war planners called for a 1 to 10,000 photographic scale, which required different lens lengths dependent upon the flight's intended altitude. For instance, if a Photo Joe's intended flyover altitude was 20,000 feet, his ship would be mounted with a 24-inch lens, while a flyover at 35,000 feet required a 40-inch lens. Poor visibility flights at 5,000 feet required a 12-inch lens, but also subjected the pilot to an increased risk of flak attacks. In addition to the primary downward-pointing camera and lenses, 2 additional side-looking cameras allowed Photo Joes to capture trimetragon images. This form of aerial survey photography involved the use of 3 cameras in one hard-mounted assembly, 1 camera pointing straight down, while 2 other cameras pointed to either side of the flight path at a depression angle from vertical of 60 degrees. Freshly captured images were eagerly awaited back at the Photo Joe's San Severo Air Base. Returning pilots issued the code words "toolkit" over their radios, which alerted ground technicians that the inbound pilot was returning with useful images on board. Once the plane was shut down on its hard stand, technicians removed the film canister and hustled it to the darkroom, where prints were developed and sent over to the interpreter's tent. There, 11 photo interpreters or PIs would lean over the still wet prints using stereoptic scanners to look for clues about the facility in question. The PIs looked for repairs or additions to a given potential target, anything that might indicate the productive health of a given refinery, factory, marshalling yard, or airfield. If a photograph showed real promise, it was placed under glasses with long legs, which produced a three-dimensional effect for closer examination. These images were then sent to 15th Headquarters with a written preliminary report where planners and targeting officers compared the new images with older images of the same facility, thereby calculating rates of damage repair, production capability, and airfield activity, as well as aircraft expansion and readiness in the case of airdromes. In general, seasoned recce pilots and photo Joes lived in constant fear of attacks by unseen enemy fighters. Speed was our only defense, recalled one recce pilot. The P-38 could generally outrun any of the Germans' airplanes in both a shallow climb or a dive. One day, a group of Messerschmitt Me-109s jumped me, and I outran them to the coast. I think I made 500 miles an hour going downhill. But I hit serious turbulence and thought the airplane was going to come apart. The main spar between the engine booms and the gondola popped a bunch of rivets. When I got back, it was a wreck, and they junked the airplane. The crew chief told me jokingly that I'd pushed on the throttle handles so hard I'd bent them. Beginning with its reassignment to the 15th Air Force in October of 1944 to the end of the war in Europe, the 5th Photo Group flew 1,873 missions, producing 15,700 pinpoints or specific targets, which in turn generated 809,000 prints from 332,000 negatives. The resulting images were submitted to 15th targeting officers and strategic planners in no less than 1,700 separate reports, making special operation units of the 15th Air Force a vital information pipeline that ultimately helped win the war against Nazi aggression.